Oh my goodness, how's everybody doing? Y'all like the New Orleans Book Festival at Tulane University? You like it? Give me a little something, something, something. Cheryl and Walter are doing a good job. All right. I love introducing people that need no introduction. The great Swisher, who's one of the great technology journalists in the United States of America, who is going to interview or be interviewed. We're not sure yet. It depends on this goes back and forth. Give him a lot of leeway because Walter needs a lot of help. The great and the inimitable Walter Isaacson and Swisher.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Whatever.
Oh, whatever.
I will say before we start, so many people have come up to me today and said, I can't wait to hear you interview Swisher.
Yeah.
And I have to say, well, actually, it's in the program. She's supposed to be interviewing me. And their face drops. Like, there is nobody in this room who's going away saying, I haven't heard Walter enough yet.
Well, I am substantively more interesting than you, so. But you've done some stuff, so that's good.
We'll make it a conversation.
We'll make it a conversation. We are using this on my podcast, On with Swisher, too, so laugh and cheer, etc. We love doing live events, and we're doing a bunch of them. I just did Mark Benioff in Los Angeles. It didn't go terrifically well for him, but it was fun. And Jamie Lee Curtis, who we all hope wins the Oscar this year.
And I want you to treat me the way you treated Jamie Lee, not the way you treated Mark.
No. That's not going to happen. But one of the reasons I was so attracted, one is I love New Orleans and I love coming here. And the second thing is he's been spending his time with someone that has really irritated me over the last year. And I wanted to know how it's going, this fine relationship between Walter and this guy named Elon Musk. You may have heard of him. If not, he's probably told you about himself at least 17 times today. But I'm going to talk about that in this book process because Walter has landed himself in the most perfect place in the world, which is hanging out with the world's craziest, richest person over the last year, who's either Howard Hughes or the second coming of Jesus, which he thinks he is. In any case, we're going to get to that. But I want to first you want to talk about Silicon Valley Bank. Which
I really do, because this is a truly interesting thing that's happening, a pivot on a bank. And you think Goldman might buy it?
Yeah, for those who don't know, there's a bank in Silicon Valley called Silicon Valley Bank, so that's why you would know it's in Silicon Valley. And it's been it has 50% of all startups, and they do lending. They're very particular. It's a boutique bank, and its value is when wiped out, but when the FDIC took control of it. It was doing fine on Wednesday, and then a bunch of venture capitalists did a run on the bank, essentially.
Peter Thiel.
Allegedly. And no, I would be not surprised in any way by that. And others. And it's not illegal to do that. He warned his people. And they now are insolvent, essentially. And so a lot of startups, including Vox Media, where I work, had their money there and don't have their cash. And so people are worried it's going to be another cascading event for all the other banks. I do not think that. But what's happened in Silicon Valley is these venture capitalists who are what someone tweeted, there are no atheists in foxholes and no libertarians on a bank run. Suddenly, these people who hated the government and said, oh, the government should shut down, we're much smarter than the government, are now like, where is the government here to save us? So it's kind of interesting.
Well, it's particularly true. I mean, the whole libertarian thing where they're very much against any government intervention. And almost all of them are on Twitter right now saying, you got to save the bank by Monday.
Yeah, exactly. And they are in a squeeze, and it could hurt a lot of tech companies who are just...
Well, I mean, Mitch and I and all of us are talking about it. It's like the bailouts, it's like student loans or whatever. There's arguments on both sides. You don't want runs on banks. On the other hand, it's FDIC insured to $250,000. Why should the people, working down the street have to pay a little bit more for their interest rates because you got to bail out people, put the money in the bank?
It may not be a bailout, right? It might be these assets are there, they have frozen them, they can sell them off slowly, and if a big bank buys them, which presumably is what's going to happen.
Well, I agree, it may not, but it also may be.
Probably not. There's probably assets, and over time, and people will get that money back. So it may not, in fact, be a bailout. What's going to happen is the shareholders are going to be wiped out, and maybe some others, but not possibly not the depositors. We'll see where it goes. But we bailed out airlines and things like that, and so that's the difficult part of that. But
Does that mean we should keep bailing out every industry?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you could argue that this is good for the economy if all these people start not making payroll and laying people off, et cetera. Anyway, we'll see. That's what they're arguing, that they are integral and critical to the future of the world.
I tend to agree on balance, but it's a
All
difficult
right,
question.
I don't tend to agree on balance. I think they've done more damage to the world than almost any industry so far, except perhaps maybe
Journalism.
the drug industry, maybe. Anyway, and more lasting, actually. But let's talk about you and what you're doing. I want to start first. You've written a biography of Kissinger, Ben Franklin. It's interesting because you go from live people to dead people rather interestingly.
You can figure out why. I mean, after I did Kissinger and dealing with him, it's okay. Next time I'll do somebody who's been dead for 200 years.
Yeah,
So I did Ben Franklin. And I do Franklin and Einstein. And your friend Steve Jobs, who was
Yeah, he
really,
was my friend,
really
but-
close.
okay.
Well, yes.
I knew-
He said, do me next.
Yes, okay. Is that how he said it? That's kind of.
And I'm like,
strange.
okay, Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, you? I
Did he
said,
really
yeah.
say do me?
Yeah,
That
well.
doesn't sound like the Steve Jobs I know, but.
Well, after I did him, I decided somebody had been dead 500 years, went back
Yeah.
to Leonardo.
And then, of course, he then did die. And then you did The Innovators, a group of hackers, how they created the digital revolution. Leonardo da Vinci, he's definitely dead. And then you did Jennifer Doudna and gene editing, who I've interviewed, who did CRISPR. So tell us how you happened upon, and I'm going to make the links with Steve Jobs, because how did you happen upon doing Elon Musk's, biography?
Yeah, it's about, and it's because he's the most interesting person around today, and I happened upon it well before he thought of buying Twitter, and I thought, okay, he's doing two of the most interesting things you could possibly do. He's bringing us into the era of sustainable energy with electric vehicles,
Sure is.
solar and battery storage, and he's bringing us back after, for 10 years, America has not been able to send anybody into orbit. He has been able to send humans into orbit and bringing us into a new era of space exploration. I said, well, this is the most interesting person around.
So how did you approach him? What was the approach?
It was kind of interesting. We have a mutual, I'll say friend, Antonio Gracias.
He's on the board. He's a
who was
long-time
on the
advisor.
board, long time, and a Crown Fellow of the Aspen Institute. So and he said, you probably ought to think about doing Elon Musk. And I said, yeah, I love space travel. I love, climate and electrification. And he said, well, I'll arrange a phone conversation with you. So I was at a friend's house, staying a summer weekend, and we had this conversation. It goes on for more than an hour.
Yeah,
Elon
he
Musk
can talk.
himself. Yeah, no, I was the one talking. And I said, yeah. I said, I think I'd love to do it, but you have no control. It's going to be biography. It's going to be mine. I want you to open up, etc. He said, yeah, I think let's just do it. And I said, that sounds good. He said, well, can I tell people? I said, yeah, I guess so. So I went from our little part of the guest cottage into the main house. And people are going, oh my God. I said, what happened? So we're just getting all these emails that you're doing Elon Musk.
Oh.
And he had put it on Twitter as he was speaking to me.
Yeah.
And and like my agent is there, and for people
Yeah.
and all these people getting emails like 20 minutes later.
Right.
That he had tweeted out, Walter Isaacson's writing this book.
Yeah, he's got a little problem with impulse control. But we'll get into that in a second. I obviously know him. I've interviewed him dozens of times.
Dozens, yeah.
And in
And
public.
you have an awkward relationship with him.
Today I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't appreciate someone tweeting homophobic, misogynist, and other things, racially insensitive things, continually. And it did break down our relationship. But I did have great admiration for the inspirational part of what he was doing.
Absolutely.
So you started doing that, and then you've been spending how many hours with him?
I travel around with him quite a bit of time in Austin. I love going to Starbase, which, as you know, is a place at the very, very southern tip of Texas. near Brownsville, but nothing else, and Boca Chica. And you stay in Airstream trailers, and they have the launch pad for what will be the largest movable object ever made by humans, which is Starship, which he hopes eventually will go to Mars. So I spent a lot of time down there, and some time in Fremont, California, and in
Which is where Tesla is.
yeah, Tesla is Silicon Valley, and then down in Los Angeles, which is where both the SpaceX headquarters and the design studio is. And he has been and is still very generous to just say, and I said, here's the way I want to do it. I don't want to just write a biography based on 10 interviews or 20 interviews. I just want to shadow you the whole time. I want to be in every meeting. I want to, watch you go up and down the assembly line at Fremont or the rocket assembly line at Hawthorne, California. And he just lets me be there as a shadow. And so it's almost like Boswell got to do with Dr. Johnson. I think I've had more access than anybody we know to the most interesting person possible. I've had more access than anybody's ever had to a biography subject.
Is that a surprise to you that he gave you such a? I mean, he's an enormous narcissist. You understand that, so I can see why he would like Walter Isaacson following him around.
I think that's a little. I mean, I don't think that what drives him is narcissism.
Okay, tell me.
I think that this is going to sound. Actually, you'll probably get it and believe it. He is driven by a sense of mission, and there are 3 or 4 missions, some of which are just so ethereal, such as humans have to be a multiplanetary species because consciousness will die out if we don't become multiplanetary before the window closes on this planet. I mean, at first I thought this is something that people say in inspirational pep talks to their employees or in podcasts to Joe Rogan, but it's not something he believes that. He also believes in sustainability and that we have to move to the era of electric vehicles. And you have to remember when he started, even in 2007, 2008, GM had killed the electric car, every other company had killed electric cars, and he said, if we don't do it, we'll never get to the era of sustainable energy.
Absolutely.
I think he's not driven by, what do you call it, narcissism. I don't think he's driven by money.
That's true.
But I do agree with you, he doesn't have much more impulse control than most people we know.
Well, I want to get to that in a minute because it's curdled into cruelty, actually, in a lot of ways. And we'll get to it. I feel when you attack someone with muscular dystrophy inaccurately to your millions of followers, it's cruel. It becomes cruel, the power. But we'll get to that in a second because I want to talk about the actual things that are inspirational. First, Tesla, which I met him when he was at X.com, and this was a payments company that later sold to PayPal. I covered him.
No, it later evolved into PayPal.
PayPal, but before that, I met him when he had essentially a Yellow Pages that he was running.
Zip2.
Zip2, right? It was that he made a little bit of money from that, not a lot. And I think he was pushed out, like a lot of these entrepreneurs.
Yeah, like Steve Jobs, like a lot of people, you start a company and then you get eased out, either by the funders, the venture capitalists who think you need adult supervision, or because he's the most intense, hardcore character there is.
Right.
And so he'll stay up till 4 a.m. making everybody work and then play video games till 6 a.m. and then think people who are not still there standing with him aren't serious.
Sure. He was a little calmer then, as I recall, but nonetheless, he had done these series of things. X.com was competing with PayPal, and then he went on to start Tesla. Or not to start, someone else had started Tesla. He got involved.
Yeah, well, he was originally, I mean, they were all co-founders in the sense that Martin Eberhard and Mark Topperning had the idea for the company, but no funding and hadn't really got it going.
He's been the driver. There's no funding,
Musk brings in the funding. They bring in 2 or 3 other people. Musk brings in J.B. Straubel, who you know. So one of the interesting things about companies is the argument over who is really the founder. And you even have that with Paul Allen and Bill Gates. You have it with, to some extent, Wozniak. Yeah, exactly. And so in any company that's successful, it's people think it was their company, and they're all sincere. They actually believe. I mean, The good thing about Cheryl Landra and I is we both think it was the other person
Oh,
who was the
okay.
driving force on Bookfest.
Yeah, it was
I know
her.
it was
It was
actually
her, but-
Cheryl who
okay.
had already done it.
So he did this. He was the driver, so to speak, in a car company. He really was the one that pushed it through.
Yeah.
And the reason I was attracted to him is because everybody else was doing an idiotic dating service or a laundry service
He
for.
was doing things with physical objects.
Well, not just that were difficult and inspirational. And so it was unusual. I always used to joke that San Francisco is full of entrepreneurs helping young people have assisted living. So San Francisco was.
But also, what you go back to Peter Thiel and say something nice, but the famous line of Peter Thiel, which you can say, which is, they promised us flying cars, and what we got
Yes.
was 140 characters.
That's the only
Meaning the
interesting
stupid, we
thing
got
Peter
these
Thiel has
stupid
said,
little.
But that's true. It wasn't something, he was unusual. They were not doing, and it was very hard and possibly failure. So that's what was attractive to me, was someone actually taking on a real
Degree of
problem.
difficulty, and it wasn't just a digital thing. It wasn't just software. It's
No.
not something you could do in your basement or your garage or your garret
Mm-hmm.
or your dorm room. He was making rocket ships and cars.
Cars, right, exactly, which was very inspirational and unusual at the time. And there's more people that have gotten into all these various things and made investments.
Name one.
Well, there's lots of people I know who made satellite investments, I'm just saying, but nobody has done these two together, 100%, there's no question. What's really hard is to sort out the visionary from what's happening now, and we're going to get into that in a second. But so he starts this company. I know you.
But keep a pin in that, because vision without execution is hallucination.
Yes.
And the question that you got to get to with Elon Musk is he was able to execute. He built the factories.
100%. And I recall there were ups and downs. At one point when I interviewed him, he had gotten so upset that Tesla was going to go out of business. And it was unusual for someone to say to me is, if I don't succeed, humanity will die. And I was like,
And what's even more unusual is
I
that he
felt like
believed that.
He did. Well, which I thought was a little bit over his skis on that one. And I kept calling him, and when the Trump administration came in, when he was going to that meeting with all the tech people, he's like, I can convince him not to be anti-immigrant. I can convince him not to be racist. And I was like, well, Jesus, I'm glad you're here, but I feel like you were not, because this.
And when all those tech company execs went there to Trump, the
Including-
first meeting,
Yep.
they each argued for very specific little things that would help him, help them. And it was very narrow, and he spent the time arguing for immigration.
Yes, he did. But I still felt like these people were not going to change someone who was a dyed-in-the-wool, whatever he happened to be.
That's why we're journalists and they're
Yes,
players
that's
in the
true.
arena, though.
So he moved on from Tesla and then moved to SpaceX and other things. Now, today, you're in the middle of this. That's what you were thinking the book was going to be about, correct? And you delved into his history. You're delving into his history, correct? His child.
Yeah, I mean, we start the book with this astonishingly difficult childhood in South Africa with a father who is Darth Vader and who still is still alive, but still haunts Elon every day.
And still is Darth Vader, from what I can tell.
Yeah,
Hasn't made the transition to nice Darth Vader, correct?
correct. I haven't I'm trying to get all my.
After he died.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No. It's and as Elon's mother says, you know, the story of the life is to make sure he doesn't turn out to be like his dad.
So it's what haunts and moves him in many ways. So you'll do.
Some in many, but look, rule one of biographers of important people, and don't take this in a gender or sexist way, but it's all about dad. Einstein, when his father has gone bankrupt doing electricity. Ben Franklin, with his father, runs away. Jennifer Doudna, even, inspired by a father. Barack Obama's sentence in his memoir that he begins, that every successful man is either trying to make up for the sins of his father or live up to the expectations. And that explains me. So when you're starting a biography, and sometimes it's the mother too, but the mother, am I going to get in trouble here? Tends to be
please
more
do.
loving. I mean, tends to be more unconditional loving in
Right.
the cases of powerful people. And Steve Jobs had it doubly because he had a biological father and an adoptive father, and they were both haunting him.
So when you think about this, I don't know what you do in cases of lesbians, but I won't ask you. My kids seem to be doing rather well. That's just a joke, Walter. I just had a date.
Julia Prosser, who's the publicist here, keeps giving me hand signals.
Stop.
Don't
Please
go there.
So you're gonna. One of the things that's worrisome to maybe some people is that it excuses behavior. That this troubled, angry child grows up to.
You know, the
this is
problem
why.
with a biographer is you explain a behavior. And you can explain it either troubled childhood. You can explain it by what I'll call the hard wiring. As he says, he has Asperger's, he's got Mini syndrome. There are people wired different ways. And Steve Jobs was wired
I'm gonna ask you that
differently.
Stephen.
And sometimes that means your ability to show empathy is, I mean, especially if you look at somebody with autism spectrum
Yeah.
things, they're different. So you explain all that. And then I will probably have people saying to me, oh, you tried to excuse the fact that he was mean to this person. And I said, well, I'm trying to explain the fact because we're all human. And when you understand somebody better, I just think that makes all of our lives more interesting.
Well, let's talk about Steve Jobs and the comparison, because one thing you told CNBC recently was that Elon shares.
I told whom?
CNBC.
Oh, CNBC.
Yes, I've been tracking you very closely, Walter. He shares the traits of being, quote, unemotional with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, both of whom I think are much more emotional, actually. Maybe.
Yeah,
Talk
emotional's
about
not
the traits serves people day to day versus their legacy. Any differences?
I think with Steve Jobs, for example, the book sort of begins and ends with Wozniak saying to me, the big question you have to ask is, did he have to be so mean to people? Could he have been kinder and gentler to people? And at the end, I asked Woz the answer, what he thinks. He said, well, if I'd run Apple, I would have been much kinder to everybody. Everybody would have gotten stock options. It would have been like family. And then he pauses and he says, but if I'd run Apple, we probably would never have done the Macintosh, not gotten it out. And Steve Jobs, when I asked him that question, he said, where you come from, I think he thought I came from New York or something, but not New Orleans. But he said, people like you wear velvet gloves and you talk, politely. But if somebody screws up, I got to say it sucks. I've got to be the mean person. And this is what Musk says as well, which is you want to be kind. People like me want to be kind to the person in front of them. They never want to insult them. Whereas that may make you feel good, and it may make the person in front of you, but it's kind to one person instead of kind to the enterprise or kind to the mission. And so you screw up doing the mission right and the enterprise right because you're trying to be so nice to individuals. And Elon Musk does not have intuitively the empathy gene to care that much whether the person in front of him likes him or thinks, he's just a rough character when it comes to empathy.
Okay. Of course, the person that wants to save humanity hates people, then, is what you're saying.
That's true of Albert Einstein. It's true of,
Well, Thomas Edison was a well-known asshole, but go ahead.
Henry Ford. I think that there are people who care about saving humanity, and there are people who care very much about the people around them or people they meet. And no, it's not a Venn diagram where the overlap is a lot.
So when you think about Jobs and the comparison, talk about the difference in doing these biographies. You spend an enormous amount of time with Jobs, and then he died. He was sick when you were in. So he had a little more perspective on his life. I definitely noticed a softening of him, and not in a soft way, but a reflective way, I would say.
Yeah, he was much more reflective, but not soft. And when he came back from the transplant
Right.
In Memphis, everybody thought, okay, we're going to get a kinder and gentler Steve because and Johnny Ive and Phil Schiller and
These are
him
people
all
at
pick
Apple.
him up at the airport. And then by that night, he's telling them everything they've done sucks.
Yeah.
You saw that a lot. He was just rough on people. Now, I don't defend being rough on people. I'm actually trying to be very nice to people, but I'm never going to invent the iPod. I'm never going to send somebody to Mars. So it's indulgent to be nice to people but you shouldn't take pride in that if you're not doing, getting something accomplished.
I have a thing called a prick to productivity ratio.
Yeah.
That with people in Silicon Valley, and if you're a
Great.
giant
I'm
prick,
gonna steal
you've got to
that
be,
line, yeah.
You can use it any time, but you have to be very productive in order to be that much of a prick.
People used to come up to me and say, after I talked about Steve Jobs, and I'd say, that whole thing about if somebody's work sucks, I have to tell them it sucks. And they come up to me and they say, I'm just like Steve Jobs. I go, yeah, okay, tell me how. Says, because if any of my employees do something and it's not great, I just tell them it sucks. I said, have you ever invented the iPod? Have you ever created the iPhone?
Yeah.
And that is basically the prick to productivity
Yes,
ratio.
yes. So they're just all prick. So when I know all of them, by the way, just so you know. I've covered them all for many decades now.
Yeah, she's writing a memoir.
Yes.
Is it going to be pricks who have known me? I think.
No,
is the title.
it's a great title. Maybe I'll just call it.
Tell me,
Pricks I
tell
Have
me.
Known. Right now, I'm thinking of calling it Burn Book, but we'll see.
Oh yeah.
But we'll see.
Who are you going to burn?
Oh, everybody.
Me? Me?
Maybe a little bit singe on the edges.
Singe don't burn.
Yeah, I'll singe you just a little. Ow. So when you're thinking about when you wrote about him, when you look at that book now, how do you feel about it? What did you get right? What did you get wrong?
On Steve?
Yeah.
The Steve Jobs book, I think I got right the fingertip genius he had in connecting design to technology.
Right.
And that, at the end of his life, he told me, you got to do Leonardo da Vinci next. I go, why? He said, because what you write about is people can connect the arts to the sciences,
That was
or
his big
technology.
thing. It was.
And Leonardo and Vitruvian Man, the naked guy doing jumping
Yep.
jacks in the circle.
Which I believe is owned by Bill Gates, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, no, not quite. But yes, he owns the Codex Leicester that had it. But anyway, that I think is why, Bill Gates was here a couple days ago. And Bill Gates is much more brilliant in terms of coding and analysis than Steve Jobs was. But Bill Gates invents the Zune, and Steve Jobs invents the iPod. You're probably one of 12 people in this room who even remember what the Zune was.
I still have my Zune. Yeah.
The Zune was an MP4 player that looked like it was designed in a basement in Uzbekistan by blind people.
Right, yes.
It was ugly.
I will tell you a very brief, funny story. Walt Mossberg who was my partner for many years, brought the Zune to Steve Jobs, and it was square. It was this weird, shitty brown color. I don't know what else. That's what it looked like, poop. And so, and Walt started to hand it to him, and Jobs, because he was ridiculously dramatic, over dramatic, he started to hand it to him, and Jobs went like this, ugh, like that.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot touch this. This is so.
And the Steve Levy counterpart was when Steve gives the iPod to Bill Gates, and Bill Gates just goes into a zone and just tries to grok the whole thing.
Which he
and
couldn't.
Can't take his eyes off of it. By the way,
He did call the iPod, Bill Gates, to me and Walt. He said it was trivial. It was just a hard drive in a white box. That's what he said to us.
Right.
He said it was trivial. And so I said, well, it was so easy. Why didn't you do it?
Well, the
because it's
main thing that
trivial.
wasn't trivial is saying to the iPod, Steve was very, very successful with it. It was more than 50% of the revenue of Apple after a while. And he said, that's so worrisome. And people said, why? Because somebody would cannibalize us. And they said, they were thinking about it. He said, well, if the brain dead people who make cell phones figured out they could put music on it, it would kill us. So we're going to have to do what becomes the iPhone.
Yeah.
And Tony Fadell, who's running the iPod
just interviewed him
division,
recently.
said, well, that'll kill the iPod. He said, well, if we don't cannibalize ourselves, somebody
Yes.
will eat us for
100%.
lunch. And he creates the iPhone because of that.
Yeah, that was a big shift. We actually interviewed him the year before, and he utterly lied about making one. Of course I'm not making an iPhone, because...
He famously
Yes,
told
'cause
you
he
he
said, "I
wasn't.
don't-"
That was pretty famous.
He
that
said, I don't like going through orifices, which he meant the telcos. And then he, of course, went right through the orifice.
And he did.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm going to tell you something that Bill Gates said here, because it connects to both Steve and Elon Musk. Bill Gates, the night before last, at the end of the interview, I was asking him about artificial intelligence and OpenAI. And he started talking about how last September they brought it to him. He said, well, that's no good. And I won't be impressed until he can get a 5 on the AP biology exam. They bring it back to him, and he gets a 5 on the AP. There's like that.
Right.
He says, I'm now back at Microsoft. Satya has asked me back. I'm doing product reviews of connecting AI to security, AI to, communicate, all of our things we do. And so you've seen it, how Bill Gates would sit there at product review meetings
Yes.
going like that. He's back in the Microsoft offices doing product review meetings on how to connect AI, because they, of course, have the rights to ChatGPT from OpenAI. Now, who started OpenAI?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
All right.
And,
With Sam Altman, with many people.
and Sam Altman, they split. And there is going to be such a rivalry there.
Well, there's going to be a rivalry, and there's sort of an arms race going on, a little bit sloppy. I'm a little bit worried about how quickly they're rolling this stuff out without safety measures. But that's what they did with the internet, so why not try it again, because that worked out so well. We'll go into it. I'm about to interview Tristan Harris about this, and I would agree with what Tristan is saying about what's happening. But let's go into the comparison. When you think about what would Steve Jobs think about Elon? Now you've moved on to Elon. The other, probably visionary, the third one would be Jeff Bezos, probably, if you had to pick one, if I had to pick one.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would Steve Jobs think of Elon?
As you know, Elon Musk went to go visit Apple about
He
a
did.
month and a half ago. And they both have an a control sense that you got to control things from end to end. Whether it's Tesla, they have to control
The manufacturing.
anode and the cathode of the battery and the
Yes.
rolling of the battery and the making of the battery pack
Yes.
and the manufacturing and whatever. And Steve Jobs, too, had that feeling that for, say, the iPhone, you have to control the iTunes store, you have to control the content, you have to have the iOS software, and you have to have the hardware. Unlike Bill Gates, who's quite happy to make the DOS and Windows operating system and license it to Compaq and HP and
Sure.
Dell and everything. So the end-to-end control is the common thread that they have. The one big difference, and this is your friend Larry Ellison, who's only been
He's
on
also
two...
not my friend, but go ahead.
Really?
None of these people are my friend. I have friends, and they're not.
You have Ursat's friends. Or what is Ursat's?
I cover them.
Former friends.
Yeah, I cover them.
Anyway,
Larry and I don't
Ellison
hang
has
out on the
only been
weekends.
on 2 boards.
Yeah.
Apple and Tesla. And I said, what's the difference? He said, what Musk gets is that if you want to be innovative day after day, you have to do the manufacturing yourself. You can't outsource it and say the iPhone will be built in China.
Yes.
And that you have to be on the factory line every day. And so what Musk says is that the machine is difficult to make, meaning the car, the rocket, whatever. But much more important is the machine that builds the machine.
Sure.
How to design the factory. And Steve Jobs never went to China, never walked the
That was
assembly
Tim Cook's
line.
job.
Whereas Musk, if you ask me what's the most surprising thing, is the amount of time he spends on the assembly lines. Not in product, just reviews meeting or
All
finance
right, but what would
meetings.
Steve Jobs think of Bill Gates? I mean, excuse me, Bill Gates. Yeah, I know what he thinks of Bill Gates, of Elon Musk.
What would Steve Jobs say? First, you help me, because you know him, and I'll try to think through while you're answering.
I think he would have abhorred him.
Abhorred him, why?
Yeah. Jazz hands in a way that's pointless and cruel.
Who?
Jazz hands. Woo. Look at me. The look at me, the obsession with looking at himself, even through casual cruelty. I don't think that was Steve Jobs in any way.
Yeah. I don't know that Steve Jobs, if you said what are the top 10 qualities you respect in a person, would have niceness as one of the top 10.
No, not necessarily, but not cruelty. It's very different.
Yeah, you'll have to read the book.
Okay.
The cruelty is a simple thing to slap on, but I think
Okay.
it's more complex.
All right, let's slap it on then. Paul Pelosi gets
Who?
Paul Pelosi gets beaten up. Elon Musk immediately, just took over Twitter, decides to tweet and comment on a trope that it was a gay love spat, and kind of blame Paul Pelosi for it. It was abhorrent.
Yeah, that was a
Walter.
really, really bad
I don't
thing
feel
to
Steve
say.
Jobs would have done that, ever.
Yeah, okay.
That's not cruel from your perspective?
It was a really, really bad, yeah, it was, and it was wrong, and it was
Why?
factually inaccurate. No, I mean, it was factually inaccurate.
Often he is. He's frequently wrong, but never in doubt.
And and then he deletes it. I mean, it
Never
was
apologized.
impulsive. Yeah, he apologized. He called, actually.
Well,
I think.
no,
You have to go look.
not-
But
Not what I heard.
I think he's very impulsive, and yes, there's not a filter that most people have, which is what you would call the kindness filter or the lack of cruelty filter sometimes.
Why does it keep going on? So you get there, and suddenly he buys Twitter. What happened there? Because listen, this was always part of Elon's makeup. 90% was fascinating, 10% was needlessly cruel, juvenile, and meme-oriented, right? Also,
I'm sorry, of what?
meme-oriented, just memes. Like a 12-year-old boy on perpetual...
You mean Twitter in general was that way?
His behaviors, his little jokes, et cetera, et cetera. One time we were in a meeting with someone very important, and he would only talk through a stuffed monkey that he had next to him, to the person. Stuff like that.
By the way,
I didn't mind.
you're saying what is true is he's the most interesting character around today.
I just thought it was bizarre. I didn't think
And
that
I
was
am
interesting.
absolutely fascinated by somebody who is this interesting, this intense, has been this unbelievably successful.
Right.
And I don't mean in making money, although
Right.
he is the richest person on the planet.
No.
But I mean in getting rockets to orbit when
Get it.
NASA
I get it. I had this
can't
argument
do it.
with Mark Benioff. He's like, there's two sides to every coin. I said, people aren't coins. They are much more. So what...
There's a million
But
sides to
yeah,
every
I get that.
facet
I get
of
that.
personality.
But what happened in the Twitter thing? Anyway, 10% of them was like this, what you're seeing on Twitter, all these outbursts, often not very nice, often scathing to people, like he did with the Icelandic entrepreneur, and then he was wrong again. He insulted this guy, you know about this, Holly, and then took it back because probably legal and financial issues all of a sudden were presented to him. It was a very id response. That was 10% of him. Now it's 90 as far as I can tell. And the 10%, the other part is gone. Because I've interviewed him, as you know, many times. We often have a set to, we had one about COVID where he said there'll be 15 deaths, very Trumpy. And then it didn't turn out that way. He got mad. He threatened to leave the interview and then, of course, never does because that's what these people all do. What has happened over the ownership of Twitter? What have you seen when you're covering that?
Well, I think you'll be surprised at what he is doing and wants to do with Twitter. On the surface, you can say everything about this dumb tweet, and yeah, I'm not going to defend any Paul Pelosi tweet, and he probably would today. But if you start at the beginning of his career, as you did, let's say, well, not the pure beginning, but X.com, and wanting to have a social network with a financial system connected to it.
Yep, that's the goal.
And that's, I mean, what I'm trying to do is, I mean, if you want, we can just talk about every tweet he did and should he have done
No,
that
I
tweet.
don't want to, but it's
But
a
if you want to
pattern.
look at the big, but if you want to look at the big goal, it's disrupting the banking industry, as he did with the thing that became PayPal, but then he left and it didn't do it. If you connect banking and finance, and just in our lives, say journalism and creation of content and writing and Substack and others, if you make it so there's easy digital payments and that people who make content can be rewarded in a simpler way, and you connect that to a social network,
Right.
that will be as transformative as anything that's happened online since the
Well,
invention
it's already
of
happened
social
in China.
network.
You know there's
Right, and WeChat,
This is not a new, fresh idea that they're doing.
no, I mean, Noah was sending rocket ships to Mars. I mean, that's 100
Well,
years
that is-
ago
that is
people
fresh.
wrote.
Actually, I would call that
Yeah.
fresh, but go
But
ahead.
no, I'm not saying, but nobody here is doing
Right,
that.
right.
And if you take a notion that content, and you try to merge WeChat, Substack, PayPal, Venmo, Twitter, banks, and put it all together,
Yeah.
you have transformed not just what you do online, you've transformed your life, which is how do I get rewarded for the content I create?
Right.
These are the bigger ideas that I think people almost get distracted from when they say, why did he tweet about Paul Pelosi?
Why did he then? Why doesn't he? Part of me is like, just get to work and shut the up.
Yeah, and you and I would
Fuck
more
up
be
is what I'm
that way,
thinking, but go
but
ahead.
he's not that way.
Right, but why do that? Why shoot yourself constantly in the foot?
I would think that if you asked him this past New Year's Eve, as his brother did, you know, what do you regret? He says,
Yeah.
well, I kind of regret shooting myself in the foot all the time.
Yeah,
Why does he do it?
he has a gun apparently that goes off all the time, and he's out of
And his
feet.
foot is in the way.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, are people?
No, I mean, you know, does he shoot himself in the foot a lot? Yeah.
Yeah.
Does he know he does that? Yeah.
Why does he keep doing it?
Read the book.
Okay, all right. Are people speaking truth to him? Are you?
I'm the biographer, I'm the observer, I'm Boswell. I don't sort of say, hey, by the way, your foot is right where you're pointing that gun, why are you going to pull the trigger?
Right.
So I don't, there are people who are very good
Yeah.
at giving him news. And you know some of them, they're not that famous, but Gwen Shotwell, Franz, you know, von Holtzhausen, the designer, the people at SpaceX, the people. And he has very strong, very loyal, hardcore people around him. And at Twitter, he found, I mean, this was a huge divergence of corporate or company culture. And you've seen it in Silicon
Sure.
Valley. There's one extreme where everybody has yoga and, you know, mental health days and,
Yes, I get
you know,
that.
right? And he wants a hardcore group posse around him, and he feels he can do more. That means he's rough and has a hardcore group of people around him.
Sure.
They push back often. Does he get bad news often enough? Well, I would say it's probably would be more useful if he got more people saying, don't aim that at your foot right away. However, because he barrels through these things, he has been able to do things that nobody else has been able to do.
That kind of.
When you write a
That sounds
book-
like the plot of the movie where Drew Barrymore lights everybody on fire, Firestarter, which is, oh, well, she's got a lot of powers and she does blow up everything, but hey, she's talented.
I didn't see the movie.
Yeah, okay. It doesn't
And-
end well.
Okay, well, this movie, we'll see, but
We'll see.
it's,
So-
I mean, people getting into all
Are
of it.
you, one of the things I worry about is enablers. I think a lot of these Silicon, not just Elon, there's enablers that grow up around these very wealthy
You know, with
people.
Steve Jobs, one of the most interesting stories.
Did not have a lot of enablers.
Correct. And Steve Jobs, early on, when he had the original Macintosh team, was very much Elon Musk-like. I want a hardcore team.
Sure.
We're going to put a pirate flag on top
I
of the
remember.
building. You remember, you wrote about it,
Yes. I always
And-
find the world's richest people acting like they're pirates kind of vaguely ridiculous, but go ahead.
well, it's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy.
Yet
So-
they're not pirates, but go ahead, go ahead.
So every year, they secretly, amongst that group, gave an award to the person who best stood up to Steve Jobs. What you may like is the first 3 years, it was won by women each time.
Of course.
Deb Coleman.
Not a surprise.
Joanna, what was her name, Joanna?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And one other. And what was particularly interesting is every one of them, when Steve Jobs eventually found out, but every one of them he promoted. That is an important task of leadership.
That is correct.
Is to have somebody around you who stands up and, you know, says, you know, don't go king crazy. You know,
Yeah.
just because you think you're the king, don't go crazy on it. You know, and you could probably go down the list of everybody I've written about and say, do they have enough people who push back on them?
Yeah, so I find that absolutely true. Steve Jobs was very willing to accept criticism and liked it, actually. One time
And I
they
think
made-
that Musk does
Yeah.
that a lot more than people think.
Really? Because
He always, at meetings, will say, and look, I can
I
tell.
find
can-
a lot of all guys, mostly guys, sitting around laughing at his jokes. That's what I see. And let
Yeah,
me-
and I think you'll see something different in the book.
I hope to, but I think there's a lot of violent agreement with him and head shaking in many ways. On the little stuff, they argue with him, but the main stuff, not so much.
Like what main stuff?
Well,
Should you tweet about Paul Pelosi?
No, but that shows some character flaws that
No, I'm telling you, I
I'm just
think
using
it's
that as an
bad
example
that- yeah,
because
yeah.
there have been dozens of
Well,
them.
okay, radar in the car. Should the car have radar?
Sure,
There's a
on the
lot of
product stuff,
pushback
yes.
on back and forth
Right.
on that, and sometimes he's creating new programs to do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But let me say, I think I'm one of the people who did push back on Elon a lot in a very friendly way because I really had a lot of regard for him. And when I didn't,
How did you push back?
lots of different, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Stuff like that. Why are you doing it this way? The COVID thing. We used, when he was being really quite tone deaf around COVID initially, we had an argument. All kinds of
Who
stuff.
was right?
Well, a million people died. He thought it would be about 15. So, I feel like
No, I meant, but COVID was a complex thing.
100%. It just was, he
And the
was certain.
question of whether there should have been lockdowns is
That's
complex.
correct. He was certain. I was like, we don't know yet. And I feel like, anyway, I'm not going
I
to get into
do
this.
agree that he sometimes has a higher degree of certainty than I have,
Without-
and maybe you have.
Without information, because he was giving me all kinds of information. And I kept calling him Dr. Musk, and he wouldn't stop. But that's okay. I just felt like it was like someone who didn't know what they were talking about, just never stopping.
And sometimes people like me, I didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, that's
I
true.
got COVID wrong.
But I get that. So the last question I want to ask you is, we've got to go, and I want to get some questions from the audience, is
Whoa,
when,
whoa,
when
put
you
down now.
think about that,
We're not going to get to Ben Franklin, sort of the friendly
no, we're not
dudes?
talking about Ben Franklin. He's
Hey,
dead.
he's wonderful. He goes into
You
Philadelphia.
wrote that 109 years ago, so I don't really care about that. But please buy it, everybody.
Yeah.
Please buy the book and buy them all together along with, there's going to be a package with the Elon Musk book. When is the book release date?
We have to see what happens, like, Starship going into space, things that
Him
might
going into space, yeah.
Your other billionaire friends are all sending themselves into space. He never thought of doing that for himself.
Yeah, but he did tell me that he wanted...
He wanted to send you into space.
He probably. He said he wanted to die on Mars, just not on landing, which was a very adorable thing to say. But no, the reason he didn't talk to me is I didn't even push back on something. He misread a quote, or one of his enablers did, and he just wrote me a note saying, "You're an asshole." And I'm like, "Go fuck yourself," and that was the end of that.
That seems like
Well, it's ridiculous.
That's a type of exchange that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, but he doesn't want to listen to people who disagree with him. In any case, we can argue about that. I'm excited to read your book.
Thank you.
But the last question, has he threatened to cut you off? Because I think he's going to cut you at some point. That's my prediction.
Look, I'm just shadowing him. I mean, I don't feel that I'm a participant in this game at the moment. Last time I was on stage like this yesterday was with Brian Greene.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most amazing things in this cosmos is that they're particles that are entangled, and by observing them, you change
Sure.
their position, Heisenberg to Schrodinger, et cetera. My role is not to be engaged with him. My role is to watch, take notes, and tell the story. And the story is this awesome, epic, complex story. So it's not about, does he like me? Do I, it's...
I don't care if he likes me
Yeah,
either.
this is not what it's about. It's about having a ringside seat into the most interesting, and you'll admit that, and I know
Sure
you
is.
admit, the most interesting person on the planet right now, doing the most interesting things, and driving people crazy in the process. And I'm just there to tell a narrative story that helps you understand it. It explains why things happened. And there'll be people say, oh, you explained it, so you're justifying this or
Sure,
that.
you're
or
going
the
to get a
other."
lot of that.
I'm going to get a lot.
Probably from me.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
probably from you. But hopefully you'll have finished your memoirs before you get mad at my book. But
I will make some determinations about.
What?
I will make some determinations about these people in my book. You'll know what I.
Right, but you're different from that. I
Yeah.
mean, you are somebody who is paid and adored to have strong opinions
Mm-hmm.
about these things. I just come from a different background. I work for the Times-Picayune. I went there, I covered a story, I reported the story. People didn't pay me to have my opinions on it.
Right.
They paid me to get the narrative right. I had a mentor here
Yeah.
as a writer, meaning he was my mentor, Walter Percy, the really great novelist. And coming out of, at one point, I talked to him and I was saying, hey, your book, The Moviegoer, I was like 15. You're trying to teach me something, or is there something in there I'm missing? What is it about? He said, well, there are two types of people come out of Louisiana, preachers and storytellers. He said, for heaven's sake, be a storyteller. The world's got too many preachers. And so I don't try to preach in the book.
All right, last question then. What is the moment you've been most impressed and least impressed? And I'll start with it. I think he's the single person in tech that I've covered over 30 years that this is the mom answer, I've never been more disappointed in someone I had great regard for. I've never.
Elon Musk?
Absolutely.
Well, and so I'm the most impressed. It's the God in the details of things, like watching him spend a couple of hours on the valve of a Raptor engine in Starship, what materials it's made of, and whether switching to stainless steel from an Inconel will have these material properties. Nobody I know who I've written about drills down into the actual details as much as he does.
And least impressed? What's the least impressive thing?
I think the impulse control, the shooting in the foot, is something like, and you ask, why do you do that? Well, you know, I think if he had a whole lot more impulse control, you would like him a lot better. He would not be doing those tweets, and he'd not be shooting off a rocket ship to Mars.
I don't agree with you. He did already do that without having done this.
No, I think that people are who they are, and the great challenge of biography is what we might call the Jefferson conundrum or the James Watson conundrum. They have all sorts of facets. They write things like, we hold these truths, and it's so beautiful. And then they say, are created equal. And you go, whoa, wait a moment, you're enslaving people. And you have to figure out the whole. And with Steve Jobs, here's the thing I did in that book. The question is, if you pull out the strands that you don't like, you say, I'm going to take those strands out of the fabric, that dark strand, that way he treated somebody, the way he treated the person who made the smoothie at the Whole Foods store. They was just mean to. If you pull out all those strands, you get a much nicer person. But do you get the Macintosh? Do you get to Mars?
So cruelty is an important part of invention?
There was a Wired cover story after the Steve Jobs book came out that was on that question, which is, did you have to be that way in order to? And as I say, people come up to me and say, I'm like Steve Jobs, I do it that way. I said, you don't have the right to do it. What did you call it? The prick to productivity ratio. I don't think you have to be that way, but Steve Jobs was that way. I don't think you have to be that way, but Elon is hardcore. I don't think you have to be that way, and Jennifer Doudna wasn't. Nicest person you'll ever meet. So there's no one recipe to success, but people are complex, and you can't sort of say, let me pull out this strand and worship this strand.
All right, I have one final question, just one single answer. Is Elon Steve Jobs, or is he Howard Hughes?
Oh, he's Steve Jobs, but I mean, in the sense that, I mean, I'm not totally an expert on Howard Hughes, but I'm not sure everything will work.
Great strides in aviation.
What?
Great strides.
Okay. Steve Jobs, who I, as you know, enormously respect, he transformed things with the iPhone. Our whole lives are
100%.
transformed, and making the first computer you could take out of a box, plug it in. I think that Musk, by actually dealing in the hard things, which is physical things, will be more transformative.
Interesting. We'll leave it at that. All right, questions from the audience. I'm sorry we went long.
I think we're very long.
That's all right.
Mitch.
So, can we ask questions?
All right, we have one question. We only one. because we have the Preservation Hall band that starts in
That's right,
4 minutes.
4 minutes. So
with
once the
free
president-
crawfish in the
Anybody?
tent.
Anybody access?
Anybody come to that microphone, you're standing in front of free crawfish and
Go ahead.
music. So go for it.
Sir.
Reading a lot of biographies about Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, seems like they were both geniuses, but at some point, because they were right about a small number of things, they started thinking they were right about a large number
Yeah,
of
the
things.
King complex, yeah.
Is there any thought on where that fulcrum point is, and does the biographer have any role? Because they both had contemporary biographers. Does the biographer have any role?
It's a great question. It says, when does the tipping point happen?
And can the biographer put their hands on?
Can what?
Can the biographer put their hands on the arc of history?
Well, you know, yeah, you can put your hands on the arc of history, and you should try not to, in my opinion. Meaning, I'm not there to say, hey, don't buy Twitter, or don't buy this bank, or whatever. I think that you want to show what is it in the person's hardwiring and soft wiring and background that leads them to be the person they are. You want to be honest about it. You want to tell a really good story. All the people you've mentioned are flawed. Henry Ford, Edison, Musk, Jobs, Swisher,
Not
Walter
really.
Isaacson. If you're very religious, you could probably name one person in history who didn't have flaws, but generally, there's 0 people who don't have flaws. The question is understanding how the fabric is a whole cloth, how the warp and the weave and the black strands and the dark strands and the light strands all go together, and why they all go together. And if we're only looking for perfection, then you're not going to have very interesting biographies, and you're not going to make a lot of progress for humanity. Crawfish, Preservation Hall, all stores
Thank you,
in the
Walter.
tent.
Thank you.
Thank you.